Hello, friends. My name is Arthur, and I'm 66 years old. If you're feeling like the world is running away from you, maybe you'll want to stick around for this. Go ahead and subscribe to the channel, because I'm about to change everything in my life, and I want to show you how. For decades, I did everything I was told was right. I served my country, worked a steady job, and bought this house. Now I'm sitting here realizing the math just doesn't work anymore. You see, I live on a fixed income, a pension I earned through sweat and loyalty. But that fixed number is up against a world where nothing else is fixed. Prices only seem to go in one direction, and it isn't down. This house, the one I've been in for over 25 years, was supposed to be my castle, my final reward. Now, every property tax bill and every rising utility payment feels like a quiet siege. Have you ever felt that way, like you're a stranger in your own home? It's a quiet, creeping anxiety, isn't it? That feeling in the pit of your stomach when you stand in a grocery aisle and have to do the mental calculation on every single item. You start choosing the lesser brand, then no brand at all. You put things back on the shelf, hoping nobody notices the slight shame you feel. A man who served his country for decades shouldn't have to choose between a good meal and keeping the lights on. How is this the freedom we were promised? I feel like I'm an outcast in my own life story. The foundation I was told was solid rock has turned out to be nothing but sand, and the tide has been coming in for years. I followed all the rules of the game, assuming the game was fair, assuming that responsibility and hard work were the guaranteed path to a peaceful retirement. I'm here to tell you that the game is rigged, and the house always wins. The problem is, we are living in the house. Everywhere I look, I see the quiet desperation in people's eyes. We're all playing along, pretending we're not struggling, keeping up appearances with neat lawns and polite nods. But we're suffering in silence, isolated in our identical houses, terrified of admitting that we're failing. But are we failing, or is the system failing us? We've been conditioned to believe that this kind of financial struggle is a personal moral failing, but I'm starting to see it's a calculated outcome of a predatory system. This isn't just me complaining about getting old, this is a confession. I've been asleep at the wheel for too long, trusting a system that doesn't care about me. It sees me as a resource to be squeezed until I'm completely dry. They promise you the dream of ownership, but what they really give you is a lifetime of debt and obligations. This video diary is my first step toward waking up, my first step toward taking back control of the one thing I have left, my own life. Well, the system didn't just break my spirit overnight. It was a slow, methodical grinding down. It started with the property tax assessment. I remember opening the envelope, my hands steady, and seeing a 22% jump. 22%. I called the county office, trying to keep my voice calm, but the woman on the line spoke a language of bureaucratic indifference. "Market values have been reassessed," she said, a line I'm sure she'd repeated 1,000 times that day. It wasn't a conversation, it was a notification of a new fee. This wasn't a fee for a service rendered, it was a fee for the privilege of simply staying in my own home, a home I had already paid for over decades. How can they just decide your property is theoretically worth more, and then demand you pay them real money for that imaginary gain? Money you can't access unless you sell the very thing they're taxing you for. It's like being forced to pay for a compliment. It feels like extortion, plain and simple, but because it's official, we're supposed to accept it. Then came the letters from the Homeowners Association, a little local tyranny I'd ignored for years. Suddenly, the fence I built with my own 2 hands 15 years ago was the wrong shade of brown. The regulations had been updated in some secret meeting I wasn't invited to. I was given 30 days to repaint it, at my own cost, to a color that looked almost identical. The cost wasn't just the paint and the brushes, It was the quiet theft of my own dignity and autonomy on my own property. It was never about the color of the fence. It was about power. It was about them proving they had the authority to make me bend to their will, no matter how absurd or meaningless the demand. You start to feel like a child in your own home, constantly looking over your shoulder for fear of breaking some new, arbitrary rule you didn't even know existed. This isn't community. It's a neighborhood of mutual surveillance, and the HOA is the warden. How is that freedom? My pension, once a symbol of a life's work, began to feel like a cruel joke. It's a fixed number in a world where everything else is a variable that only trends upward. I watch the news, and they talk about inflation in these abstract percentages, as if it's just a number on a screen. They don't show you what it really looks like. They don't show you that it looks like choosing the cheaper brand of coffee, then no coffee at all, then just drinking hot water and pretending. It looks like turning the thermostat down to 62 degrees in the dead of winter and wearing a second sweater indoors. It looks like the hollow, anxious feeling in your gut when your car starts making a new noise and you have to weigh the cost of a mechanic against the cost of a prescription refill. This isn't living. It's a constant low-grade survival mode, a war of attrition fought in grocery aisles and at the pharmacy counter, a battle you are mathematically guaranteed to lose over time. That feeling of being trapped becomes physical. Some nights I'd wake up and the silence of the house would be deafening. It didn't feel like a sanctuary anymore. It felt like a tomb I was paying for in installments. I'd walk through the rooms I knew so well, touching the walls, and wonder, why does this thing I supposedly own feel like it owns me? The stress builds a permanent nest in your chest, a constant hum of anxiety, always waiting for the next official-looking envelope to arrive. And the loneliness of this fight is the heaviest burden of all. You feel like you're the only one going through it. You look out your window, and your neighbors are all playing the same game, pretending they're not struggling. They're polishing their cars and watering their chemically green lawns as if everything is fine. We've been conditioned to believe that this kind of financial struggle is a personal moral failing, a sign that you just didn't work hard enough or save smartly enough. So we suffer in silence, isolated from one another in our identical-looking houses, each one a private prison of quiet desperation. Everyone is terrified of admitting their own vulnerability, terrified of being seen as the failure on the block. But are we the failures, or is the game itself designed for us to fail? What if our struggle isn't a sign of our weakness, but a sign that the system itself is predatory and fundamentally broken for the common man? I started to see it everywhere. I saw it in the tired eyes of the young cashier at the hardware store, who told me she was working 2 jobs just to make rent on a tiny apartment. I heard it in the voice of my mechanic, a man who could fix any engine but told me he couldn't afford to fix his own daughter's car right away. We are all on the same sinking ship, but we've been tricked into arguing about the color of the deck chairs. The real enemy isn't our neighbor with the barking dog, or the different political sign in their yard. The real enemy is the invisible architecture of the system itself. It's the one that pits us against each other in a desperate scramble for scraps, while it quietly picks our pockets. It thrives on our division, on our isolation, on our misplaced anger. It wants us fighting each other so we don't look up and see who is really pulling the strings. For months, I was consumed by a quiet, simmering rage, and let me tell you, that is a corrosive emotion. It eats you alive from the inside out. I felt bitter. I had done everything right by their standards. I served my country with honor. I worked for decades without complaint. I was a responsible citizen. And for what? To be nickel and dimed into a state of perpetual anxiety in my old age. To have my autonomy stripped away, piece by piece, by 1,000 tiny cuts. They make you feel old and useless, That's a key part of their plan. A man who feels useless doesn't fight back. He accepts his fate. They use words like retiree and senior citizen to gently nudge you into a box, to get you off the stage of active life. They want you to sit quietly, consume their media, and be a passive recipient of whatever services they deem you worthy of, right up until your savings account runs dry. You are not a person to them. You are a line item on a balance sheet. When you are no longer a profitable consumer or a productive taxpayer, you are simply discarded. The promise of the American dream, the one I fought for and worked for, has been replaced by the grim reality of the American subscription model. The only problem is, the monthly fees are now rising faster than my ability to pay them, and the penalty for cancellation is ruin. Look at our food supply. That's another vector of control. The shelves are filled with food products, not food. They are things engineered in a laboratory to be shelf-stable for years, packed with chemicals and preservatives that I can't even pronounce. Real food, the kind that grows in healthy soil, is being systematically turned into a luxury item. They have disconnected us from the most basic source of our own survival and well-being, making us utterly dependent. We rely on a fragile 1,000-mile supply chain that we all saw could shatter at a moment's notice. You have to ask yourself, how can we call ourselves a free nation if we can no longer even feed ourselves? A nation whose people are dependent on massive corporations and complex, fragile logistics for their daily bread is a nation walking on a tightrope over a canyon, and the rope is starting to fray. True independence starts with the soil. Then they have the nerve to talk about security. They want to put cameras on every street corner, monitor your online activity, and track every purchase you make. But what about real security? What about the security of knowing you can keep a roof over your head without a bureaucrat changing the rules on you? What about the security of knowing you can feed your family wholesome food? They have completely redefined the word to suit their own agenda. Their version of security is about protecting the system from you. My version of security, the kind that lets a man sleep soundly at night, is the very thing they have been systematically dismantling for decades. I began to realize I was fighting the wrong war. I was fighting to preserve my small, insignificant position within a system that was explicitly designed for me to lose in the end. I was trying to hold a trench that was already being flooded. The true objective was not to win the HOA's approval or to successfully negotiate with the tax assessor. That was playing their game on their turf. The true objective had to be getting off their battlefield entirely. The objective was to make myself irrelevant to their system of control and extraction. This was not a retreat, it was a strategic relocation to higher ground, a place where their rules and their rigged game simply couldn't reach me anymore. The breaking point wasn't some grand explosion, it was a quiet Thursday afternoon. I was at the kitchen table with a pile of bills spread out before me like a losing hand in poker. The new tax assessment, the inflated utility bill, another petty notice from the Homeowners Association. It all blurred together into one single, insurmountable demand for my money, my compliance, my energy, and my life. I looked out the window and saw a little finch on the bird feeder, completely unconcerned with market values. And in that instant, something inside me didn't just break, it shattered. I started to laugh. It was a strange, hollow sound at first, but it grew into something real. I was laughing at the sheer absurdity of it all. Here I was, a man who had served his country, a supposed homeowner, being slowly defeated by paperwork. The game was so transparently rigged, and I had been playing it with a straight face for decades. That laugh was the sound of a chain snapping. The rage I'd carried for months just evaporated, and in its place was a cold, clear focus. I finally understood. The system isn't broken, It's working exactly as it was designed to. It is a finely tuned engine of wealth extraction, and I am the fuel. My struggle wasn't a symptom of its failure. It was a sign of its success. And the only way to win a game that is designed for you to lose is to stand up and walk away from the table. With that single thought, the fear was gone. What was the worst they could do to me? Take my house? I was no longer afraid of that, because I was about to give it up anyway, but on my own terms. The goal was no longer to survive inside their framework. The goal was to make their framework completely irrelevant to my survival. This was not a retreat. It was a strategic relocation to higher ground, where their rules and their authorities simply couldn't reach me. My entire story changed in that moment. I wasn't a failure being squeezed out by circumstance. I was a prisoner who had just realized the cell door was unlocked the whole time. The key wasn't money or power. It was the simple, terrifying, and liberating will to walk away. I decided right then and there to stop playing their game. I would no longer be a compliant cog in a machine that was grinding me down. I was taking back control. That evening, I didn't turn on the television. I pulled out a clean notepad and a pen. At the top of the first page, I wrote 2 words that felt more powerful than any deed or title. Exit strategy. For the first time in years, I wasn't defending or reacting. I was planning. I was building. This was not an ending. It was the first day of my own personal declaration of independence. The system could have the house. I was taking back my life. So the first action wasn't a shout. It was a phone call to a real estate agent. The moment that for sale sign went into my lawn, a strange peace settled over me. My neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering. They thought I was defeated, forced out. But I knew the truth. This wasn't a retreat, it was an evacuation. Every potential buyer who walked through my front door wasn't just inspecting a house. They were funding my escape from the very prison they were trying to buy into. The next phase was a baptism by subtraction. I became a fixture on Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. The fine china, the leather sofa, the collection of books I'd never read again. It was all just weight. With every item I sold, the trailer got lighter and my war chest grew heavier. I thought it would be painful, letting go of a lifetime of accumulation, but it was intoxicatingly light. I realized I wasn't giving up my possessions. I was taking back my life from them. Then came the hardware. I found a 20-year-old Ford F-250 with a diesel engine that sounded like it meant business. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. A week later, I bought a used 30-foot fifth-wheel trailer. The roof had a leak, and the wiring was a mess, but the bones were good. I wasn't buying a luxury RV. I was acquiring the raw materials for my own personal ark. My freedom wouldn't be handed to me. It had to be built with my own 2 hands. My days were filled with a purpose I hadn't felt in 30 years. I was up at dawn, my hands covered in sealant and grease. I patched that roof, recorked every window, and tore out the old, corroded wiring. I installed a small solar array on the roof, connecting it to a battery bank. My hands, which had grown soft in retirement, became calloused and sure once more. I was sore every single evening, and my mind had never been clearer. This was real work, building something that mattered. This wasn't just physical labor, it was an education. I learned to read topographical maps, to understand solar capacity, to test the pH of soil, and to purify water with simple tools. I spent hours on forums, not complaining, but learning from men and women who had already made this journey. I was replacing the passive, anxious consumption of my old life with the active, empowering production of my new one. I wasn't just escaping, I was becoming capable, and true security is born from capability. The day I signed the closing papers on the house was anticlimactic. I expected to feel a pang of loss, a moment of sadness. Instead, I felt nothing but the quiet hum of victory. I walked out of that lawyer's office into the sunshine, took a deep breath, and felt the last chain fall away. The money in my account wasn't for a new stock investment or a managed fund. It was fuel. It was my escape fund, and I was finally ready to burn it. The first morning on the road was surreal. I watched the sun rise from the driver's seat of my truck, the trailer hitched up behind me, containing everything I truly owned in the world. I wasn't driving toward a vacation spot. I was driving toward a new life. Every mile I put between me and that suburban street felt like a year of anxiety dropping off my shoulders. I was a pioneer, and the frontier wasn't a place on a map. It was the unwritten future. I know this journey won't be easy. This isn't a storybook ending. It's the beginning of an honest struggle. There will be cold nights, mechanical failures, and moments of doubt. But they will be my challenges, born from the real world of physics and nature, not from the arbitrary whims of a bureaucrat or an HOA board. I will take the honesty of a blizzard over the tyranny of a compliance notice any day of the week. This is the trade I have willingly made. For weeks I've been driving west, studying county zoning maps in truck stops and comparing land prices on my phone. I'm looking for a piece of earth that the system has forgotten, a place where I can put down new roots. I think I've found it. In the next video, I'm going to take you there. I'm going to show you the land where I will make my stand. Until then, stay strong, and let's get ready to build something new. What happens next is up to us. I pulled the old Ford off the dirt track, the engine ticking as it cooled in the quiet air. For a long time I just sat there, looking at the overgrown plot of land that was now mine. Finally, I opened the heavy door and stepped out. The air smelled different here, thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, not cut grass and car exhaust. I felt the uneven ground under my worn boots, a solidness that no deed or title could ever truly capture. This wasn't just land, it was a promise. The silence was the first thing that truly hit me. Not an absence of sound, but the presence of real sounds. The wind whispering through the tall, dry grass, the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. There were no sirens, no leaf blowers, no constant low hum of the freeway. It was a quiet so profound it felt like a physical thing, pressing in, cleaning out all the years of accumulated noise from my soul. I wasn't just in a new place, I was in a new state of being. I knelt down and scooped up a handful of the soil. It was coarse and dark, clinging to the lines on my palm. This was real. It wasn't a number on a tax assessment or a line on a zoning map. This was the actual foundation. In the suburbs, my hands were always clean, holding a pen to sign a check or a remote to change a channel. Here they were covered in the very thing I would depend on for my survival. And I felt no defeat, only a deep, abiding sense of purpose. That's when the feeling finally washed over me, a wave of pure, unadulterated liberty. It wasn't the giddy joy of a vacation. It was the quiet, bone-deep peace of a soldier coming home from a war he didn't realize he was fighting. All those years of feeling trapped, of being slowly bled by 1,000 cuts from a system I couldn't see. It all fell away. Standing on that small patch of forgotten earth, I wasn't a defeated old man. I was the founder of my own nation. This is the most important lesson I've learned out here. True security isn't found in a stock portfolio or a government promise. It doesn't come from a paid-off mortgage in a suburb where you're still not free. Real, tangible security is born from capability. It is the simple, profound knowledge that you can provide for your own basic needs. The system has spent decades convincing us to trade our essential skills for convenience. I am here to tell you that it is a bad trade. I see the fear in people's eyes when I tell them what I've done. They say, "I could never do that." What they really mean is, "I am too afraid to leave the cage." The cage is comfortable, I know. The food bowl is filled on a regular schedule, and the climate is controlled. But it is still a cage. The first step, the hardest step of all, is admitting you are not free. Admitting that the promises you were sold were a lie. This is not just my story anymore. I know there are millions of you out there feeling this same pressure, this same quiet desperation. You are being told that your struggle is your own fault, that you should have saved more, worked harder, or been smarter. That is a lie designed to keep us divided and weak. Your struggle is not a personal failure. It is a symptom of a systemic disease. The only cure is to quarantine ourselves from the sickness and build our own immunity. So please, share your story in the comments below. Tell me about the absurd HOA notice, the crushing tax bill, the moment you realized the math just didn't work anymore. Do not let them force you to suffer in silence. Their greatest weapon is our isolation. When you share your story, you find you are not alone. You build a community. You realize that your quiet desperation is actually a shared chorus. This is where we begin to find our collective voice. We have been taught to be consumers, but our souls yearn to be creators. We have been taught to be dependent, but our spirits crave freedom. The system has inverted everything, and it's time we turned it right side up again, starting with our own lives and our own homes. Do not let them have your house. Reclaim your sovereignty. This is our new frontier. It is not a place on a map, but a choice in our hearts. Until next time, everyone, let's rise together.